and welcome to Security and Compliance Pitfalls MSPs Must Avoid. Today, we are offering a free consultation to all of our attendees. Learn how to scale security and compliance across multiple business units and frameworks. You can contact us using the Calendly link below. You can see on your screen. This Calendly link will connect you to one of our Ostendio experts. Oh, and you can also follow us on LinkedIn. We post news and updates about Ostendio on LinkedIn, so we would appreciate you connecting with us. And I'd like to welcome you again to today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping reminders. My name is Miranda Elliott. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager for Ostendio. This session is being recorded. All attendees are on mute, and we will have a session for Q&A towards the end of the webinar. Please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, or you also have a chat feature on LinkedIn Live, and we hope to get round to as many of your questions as possible. We welcome questions. This is an open discussion, so we hope that you will join us at the end of the webinar and share some of your thoughts. Let me move on quickly to our speakers today. I'd like to welcome Aaron Higley. He is the Senior Vice President at PIParnters. Aaron has over 16 years of experience leading cybersecurity and compliance initiatives, including auditing, planning, managing, and mitigating cyber risk. He has over 20 years of experience helping organizations maximize the business value of their technology investment. Aaron's previous leadership roles included CTO, CIO, CISO, and a strategic consultant positions. And I would also like to welcome James Thomas today. He's senior director, also at PIParnters. James is part of the vCISO services within security and infrastructure practice at PIParnters. He brings over 30 years of experience in engineering, technology, and cybersecurity. He has experience across various sectors with leadership roles including CISO, head of technology for GRC, and consultant positions. He's focused exclusively on cybersecurity for the last 20 years. And I'm also going to introduce you to your host for today, Grant Elliott from Ostendio. Grant is our Chief Product Officer and also co-founder at Ostendio. He established Ostendio in 2017 and has built it into a solution that has been steering hundreds of companies towards audit-ready security programs, offering compliance with over 250 frameworks and regulations. Grant has over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity program development and regulatory audit. So let's get started. I'm happy to hand over to our host, Grant Elliott.
Thank you, Miranda. I appreciate it. And I guess let's start off by welcome Aaron, welcome James. I know we've been working on doing this for a while and speaking for a while, so I'm super glad to have this opportunity to have a chat with you both. Why don't we start? I'd love to kind of just learn, I'm always interested in people's personal biography, their origin story. And so, what got you to this point, right? When you were at school, did you go into IT? Did you always want to kind of head down this path? And Aaron, let's start with you. Give me your origin story.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually started off in college thinking I was going to be the next Don Draper from Advertising Man, and then I actually have an undergraduate degree in marketing communications and from Brigham Young University, and thought I was going to go into advertising, and quickly when I got into the real world realized that it was not something that I wanted to do long term. Quickly pivoted my first year out of college and got a job in IT, and from there just started off as a help desk guy and just general IT guy, and worked my way up. And about 2004, I was at a casino company, and we're a publicly traded company, and the bosses said, "Hey, we got this new thing called Sarbanes-Oxley, and we got to figure it out, Sarbanes-Oxley, and do audits across our entire organization. Can you do this. You've got some free time, so we want you to be the Sarbanes-Oxley guru. So I went around to all of our casinos and led that initiative to get us compliant, or get some good security practices put in place for us to be able to pass our Sarbanes-Oxley audits. And like I said, that was 2004, and just I kind of got stuck. It was like, you get pulled in. It's like the mafia. You got sucked into security, and I've been there ever since. And continued to work my way up in my career, and was as CIO several times, 3 times at different companies. And every time I wore that CIO, but I also wore the CISO hat. So security was always kind of in the background. And then when I joined my current company about 4 years ago, continue to just run that practice and run that focus around security and infrastructure.
I love those sliding door moments, right? When you think something's going to be one way, and it can be conscious or it can be subconscious, but then an accidental meeting or just to your point, suddenly there's no one to do a particular role and you just take it on, and before you know it, you've got a career shift. What about you, James? I know you get a familiar accent. What's your kind of background coming from Scotland?
It's funny you mentioned things that were interesting as a kid. I was interested in electronics, and really good at taking things apart that would never work again after that. And so the career choice of, well, maybe I could learn how to put these back together and get them working, or fix things. And I happened to stumble into a career with the BBC as an engineer, which then discovered I wasn't very good at that and never managed to fix things. But it did lead me neatly into exposure to IT, which was, I'm going to date myself now, but it's one of those things where as a BBC engineer, we never outsourced. We were superhuman and could do anything as far as the BBC was concerned once you were officially trained. And a manager came up one day and said, "We're getting a network and some computers. Go install it." Because I happened to be walking past his door, and so that was Windows 3 and personal NetWare and a 10/2 coax network. So I really am dating myself, but that was the light bulb moment for, I like digital better than analog, and I can do this IT stuff better than I can do the thing that I've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years. So I pivoted into IT, followed the usual progression, support, admin, architect, all those kind of things. And just, again, similar to Aaron, that career progression, started to see cyber becoming a topic, and realizing that, I was doing that for my clients at the time, as part of the IT delivery. And it's been much more interesting to be doing cyber full time. It was a really interesting area, really interesting field. And so went back to school, pivoted into that, got a master's from Norwich University in the US, which was recognized at the time as a NSA Center of Excellence for information assurance education, and never looked back. So that was 2003. So Miranda says 20 plus years in cyber exclusively.
Yeah, fantastic. And so let's talk about PIP, because obviously the organization with it right now. What were you doing before PIP? What attracted you to PIP, and then tell us a little bit about what is it about PIP that you think is unique and interesting? And Aaron, let's go back to you.
Sure. I mean, so I worked about 20 years in industry, kind of worked my way up through to that IT leader level, and I was a CIO. The last stint was a CIO for a mid-market private equity-backed company, and that's how I actually met some of the guys at PIP, and was really wanting to make a kind of a career change into taking what I learned over the last 20 years and of helping companies similar to mine. I was really looking for an opportunity for us to not just be a consultant, that has never done anything, but bring my experience to the table and help organizations improve their technology. And our focus in the security and infrastructure practice is really around helping organizations, build a security program and grow it, and become more resilient against cyber attack. And that's what really appealed to me, is being able to bring pragmatic pragmatic things to the table to help organizations be successful and become more capable, more resilient, and not have to deal with any major cyber attacks or not be prepared.
What really interested me when we first started talking about PIP, though, was the specific focus, right? And so, the part that kind of makes you a little bit unique, though, is that you kind of get most of your clients, or you serve the kind of PE community. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So we focus almost exclusively on private equity and their portfolio companies, and they're somewhat unique in that private equity firms will buy companies as an investment vehicle, and the idea is they buy them at a reasonable amount. They do some improvements over time, maybe do some consolidations, and then they sell them, to either another private equity firm, or they go public, or there's some sort of change of control at the end. So there's really is a beginning, middle, and end of the ownership cycle. And we focus on helping organizations wherever they are in that ownership cycle do improvements.
Now, having gone through a few due diligence exercises ourselves as an organization, James, I'm really interested because, private equity and even to some degree, the VC community itself has never really struck me as an industry that's that much focused on making sure that the portfolio companies are secure, so long as they're returning a profit. How do you, how receptive do you find these organizations to what you're approaching, and how do you make them, I guess, create a higher value on security and make them appreciate the value of security in order for you to obviously work with them?
Yes, that's a great question, Grant. I think like PEs, like every other sector, any other organizations, it's about leading from the top and about making cyber a priority and understanding, the risk and the threat landscape that you face and the risks that come with that, and making a decision to either be proactive about it, or and take steps to solve for the problems you face, or to wait till something happens and hope that it doesn't, and as we know, after all these years in this business, that typically doesn't pay off. I think you still see, and then again, talking broadly, there are still organizations that are going to take the hit and look at that as, this is my loss expectancy. I'll pay for it and I'll move on, So it's definitely, you have to try to sell that proactive side, first of all, and you have to position in such a way that committing to and spending on cyber is ultimately going to cost you less than those single loss occurrences, or whether it's the financial or reputational loss of a hit, which we know is a when and not an if. And we see that, you mentioned diligences, we do diligences a lot. We've done diligence on companies, we've shown the red flags, and it's happened within a couple of weeks they've had a breach. So the evidence is there that if you have these red flags showing up, you're a target, and very often you are being targeted and breached as a result. So it again has to be from the top. The business has to understand there's a cost to doing nothing, and if you position it right, the cost of doing something can be less than that.
So, you can take that a little bit further, because I think you can highlight some good examples there of that kind of pre-investment due diligence, right? To kind of highlight issues within a potential acquisition. The example I always remember is I remember kind of just shortly after the pandemic started and Zoom really started to take off for obvious reasons. And Zoom was already a darling of Silicon Valley. It had already received kind of hundreds of millions of investment. But obviously, as their operation grew and scaled, it became clear that there were significant issues, right, within their backend environment. They weren't encrypting data, like they said. There was also security vulnerabilities within their backend stack. All things that you would think that, given how big they were, should have been identified by their investors prior to that coming in. Now, again, they were able to address those issues, and again, the argument there they would have is they had a budget big enough at that point, a revenue big enough at that point, they were growing fast enough at that point to basically kind of turn those things around and could put money towards this. A lot of companies don't necessarily have that growth, but the idea is that I think PEs oftentimes buy companies restructure them, sell them. What's changing now where PE companies have to start worrying now about, or VC companies, that while they're within their portfolio, something can basically happen that directly impacts the value? Beyond just you doing a risk assessment and making a buy, no buy decision, I mean, after they've made that purchase, because, you know, I got to imagine it doesn't matter how much time you have pre-investment, you know, a due diligence can only go so far.
Yeah, I agree, and we see that with, you know, with the diligence, the buy side diligence that we're doing, is there is an expectation of a standard that should be achieved from a cybersecurity perspective, because that directly translates into a cost for that acquirer if they go ahead with the deal. You know, because so we tend to find often that the acquiring companies are taking cyber more seriously, and the underwriters are taking it very seriously. In terms of closing those deals, and so that's become a driver. And part of what we're doing is recognizing that, you know, to your example about Zoom, is we look at cyber maturity across the deal life cycle. And what we're trying to do is we assume you're going to have problems with your, call it foundations, your essentials, you know, the basic stuff you should be doing, you're probably not doing the way you should, or not doing it at all. And so there's kind of a tactical approach at the bottom end of that. But as you mature through, you know, into more of a managed state, and then into more growth and scale, we're trying to position our clients to be ready for the end of that deal cycle, which is that sell side diligence. You can now present a coherent position on cyber. You know, you can demonstrate. And again, through using platforms like Ostendio, you can demonstrate that you have the data to support your position. You can evidence it now, you know, and formally demonstrate that you have controls that are operating effectively, that they're adequate. And that's, I think, the pressure's coming from the buy side on that. If you're not ready, there's going to be a cost, and that cost might be the thing that's a deal breaker.
And then Aaron, that's a good point, because maybe you can give some examples, and you know, feel free to name names if you want to, but I would encourage you not to. There is a real impact here, right? You have situations, I know you told me, where you've been brought in by a PE firm to kind of do a kind of risk assessment for a potential acquisition, and you've raised sufficient red flags that the PE company has decided not to move forward with that acquisition.
Yeah, that's, you know, that certainly does happen. You know, I think that, you know, to kind of circle back or back up, you know, the things that the PE firms really care about is understanding the risk and managing risk and protecting themselves against risk. Because at the end of the day, a PE firm is an investment organization. They're buying companies as an investment, and their intention is for that investment to grow over time, so that when they go to sell it, they're making the biggest return for their investments. And so they're thinking about this all from a, you know, what are my risks? You know, how risky is the deal? From a, you know, all the different kind of levers, from you know, financial to cybersecurity to any other things. You know, it's what are my risks, and you know, what's the likelihood of those risks happening? What are the and then if they do happen, what's the downside, right? How much is this going to cost me? So we've done a few. It's really rare that security is the main driver. There's a bunch of other things often that are drivers in their decisions, but it just kind of, they all add up to looking at the risk. So is the risk too great for us to move forward? And that, like I said, it doesn't happen very often, but you know, it does happen. You know, and a lot of times these organizations are first-time owners, or first time being acquired by a private equity firm. So they don't have a lot of processes in place. Typically it's an owner-funded organization, where the owners, the founders have started this business. They've grown it to a certain point. Now they're looking for additional capital. That's why they're trying to sell the business. And so often not a lot of processes, not a lot of consistency across the board. And so that's, you know, oftentimes when we come in these organizations, they're really trying to build that foundation. And so that's where we kind of, you know, come in and say, here's the foundations that you've got to get to And working with a PE firm, we help them establish what the foundations would look like of a company that they should be acquiring. If there's a lot of missing foundations, then it becomes a red flag.
Yeah. I think in my experience, when I look across our portfolio, I tend to find that well-run companies tend to have a reasonably well-run cyber practice, because I think smart business people do realize that it's a critical element. When you guys do the assessments, I'm guessing there's kind of three scenarios. There's like scenario you go in, because as you mentioned, it's all about managing risk, right? And so you're going to kind of give them a kind of risk score. And some of those situations, there's going to be hey, listen, there's probably not a good idea. They're maybe a little bit too risky. And other scenarios, you're probably saying, look, they've got some gaps, but we could remediate those gaps. They're not insurmountable. Tell me about some of those examples where you're going into those organizations, and what does that typically look like? You've, I guess, done a risk assessment, which is part of the due diligence process, and then how do you go about building the kind of security program for those organizations?
Yeah, and we think about helping organizations establish good security programs in a kind of a four-phased approach. There's the first, you got to assess, figure out where they are currently. Then you build an action plan or a security roadmap of how are you going to go from now you've assessed and identified 20 gaps. How are you going to take those gaps and actually prioritize them, put them on a timeline, establish a budget against them, and help them move forward. Then there's the execution phase of actually doing the work of doing the implementation of the initiatives. And then finally, that ongoing tracking and improvement. So oftentimes we like to start off with assessment, but really, quickly move forward to now you know what you have to do. Now let's put it on a timeline so you can actually see improvement over that ownership cycle.
All right. And then, James, I know we spent a lot of time on this kind of when we were reviewing the Ostendio platform. I'm pretty curious as to what part of using the Ostendio platform helps you. You mentioned earlier on. How does that help you kind of, I guess, support what Aaron just said in terms of your path moving forward?
Yeah, so part of the reason, of course, we went to Ostendio and I say this up front was the team, right? Because for us, when we partner like we have with you guys, it's as much about the team as it is about the product and the service, right? And we looked at a lot of different platforms, a lot of different companies, and it was that combination that sealed the decision for us. But the way it supports the approach that Aaron just outlined is that as partners, we can do the assessment phase, which is a light touch. It's not onerous for the target, and it's not onerous for us. And we can assess against a number of different standards, even up to including our own scorecards and internal standards that we've developed. So there's flexibility for us in how we approach a specific target or client, a specific use case, and then from there, it helps us understand then which of these clients are right for the full instance of the platform, who's going to benefit from all of the features, or even just a subset of the key features that Ostendio can deliver, and who isn't ready yet, and who can stay with us just in that kind of ongoing light assessment approach and continue to develop, as Aaron said, those assessments, recurring assessments. Start to get them from a point in time to regular assessment of posture, and which again gets lighter touch over time, because the heavy lift is always in the first one. Mm-hmm. If you maintain it, then it becomes easier to do, and giving then both the portfolio companies and just as importantly the PE firms, the view at the portco level, how are you doing, but also that holistic view, how are you doing collectively, where's the risk across the portfolio, where are the commonalities and themes? And that's where, again, Ostendio can help us, pinpoint based on the reporting we can do then is what are we seeing in terms of thematically across the portfolio? And then what solutions can we bring to bear that have, scale and cost effectiveness that can be introduced at the PE level for each portco to deploy, independently. So there's lots of aspects there, but it certainly helps us with those initial assessments, and it helps us then walk the client into a much more organized approach to risk management.
So, you mentioned this again, trying to provide this kind of holistic approach to the PE companies, and this kind of brings me to another point that I think is interesting. So, there's been a lot of changes recently from a regulatory perspective. The SEC kind of came out with a kind of a security rule last year. Clearly this, for registered companies, securities, this is a pretty big deal, right? Because suddenly they're putting the kind of personal onus on the kind of operators of the business. As we see with SolarWinds and the actions that have been taking, whether you agree or whether you don't agree with what's going on there, there's no doubt that there's an attempt to try and ensure that securitized organizations are taking security more seriously, because it's considered to be seen as a huge financial risk for these organizations. What's your I'm kind of curious if you have any kind of observations or reflections on the kind of SEC ruling, and are you seeing any impact? Are you using that yourself when you're actually having conversations with potential prospects or organizations that you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I came from a background. Most of my cyber career has been in large financial services, so used to highly regulated environments, and these same drivers that the SEC and the FTC with their safeguards and etc. Those have been ever present and driving what those large organizations do, which is why typically they're the ones that have invested the most in cyber. Because they have to, and I think that's what regulation drives first and foremost. Is it takes the decision away from will I do it or not do it to I have to do it now. To what extent should I do it? What's appropriate for my business? I think what I see with these with the SEC rule, the safeguards, is it's driving an awareness of the essentials. So what we call cyber essentials that has been done both in the UK and the US from a government perspective. I think we're starting to see is just a push towards you need to solve for the basic things that are causing you all the problems. It's like still seeing in application development the same top 10, right? That's been there for 20 years, and you see the same things over and over again. And I think we see that in the fundamentals. So if you look at any list of cyber essentials, solving for those, I think, is at the core. If you distill it down as the core, what the SEC ruling, the FTC, et cetera, are trying to drive 4 different sectors that have possibly largely ignored these problems, or to the examples you gave earlier, they've focused spending on growth and customer acquisition and not necessarily on the fundamentals. So that's my perspective on it. And Aaron probably got something to add there.
Yeah, I was going to say, Aaron, I'll let you add to that, because I'm always, I've been doing this long enough, and I'm sure you guys have as well. There's always this holy grail that's going to suddenly change everything, right? All of a sudden, this is going to mean that everyone's going to start taking security seriously. This is a regulation. This is the change. This is, and it never really seems to happen, right? It seems to be the same sort of dynamic that's been there for 20 years between the better organizations doing and other organizations finding ways to kind of skirt a lot of the regulations. This one does, to me, seem a little bit different, right? Again, when you're actually going after individuals, so whether the prosecution is successful or not, it seems to me like there's still, when I talk to people sitting on the sidelines thinking that, well, look, if that prosecution ends up being successful, then there's a lot of people that are going to have to sit up and take notice about, their personal freedoms at stake.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are going to still, we're going to see how these things play out, but certainly at the PE level, because they are a financial institution, I mean, they're taking in investments and deploying those investments. They have to start to take the security aspect very seriously, because they're managing customer funds when they buy assets. So I think what's going to happen, or what's starting to happen in the industry, is private equity firms are starting to ask the question, like, what's the impact of this new ruling on me? How should we be thinking about it? A couple of the things in the SEC regulations are around make sure you have cybersecurity expertise at the board level, so that you understand what your risks are. So we're starting to have those conversations with private equity firms as you should be thinking about this. You should be establishing expertise at the PE level, and then really take security seriously. Not only for you but for your portfolio companies. What's still somewhat unclear is how the breach notification type of things will need to be take into account when it comes to private portfolio companies, but for sure breaches at the PE level will need to be certainly addressed, and notification will need to happen. So I think PE firms are starting to wake up to the idea that they are going to have to take security seriously. They're going to have to make sure they have somebody that understands security, understands what their risks are and what their exposure is. And so, we are having those conversations much more regularly. And in essence, how can we help them achieve that security leadership at the PE level?
And I think that's what's really fascinating me about it right now, because again, we're already starting to see more and more public companies proactively putting out breach notifications, right? Because again, they're going to feel that they have to. Even they're putting them out within 24 hours. Microsoft put one out recently, again, where they weren't even sure if there was an explicit breach, but they're putting these notifications out. I think that the thing that kind of fascinates me on the PE side is because they've still got to do their own 10K disclosures. They've still at a certain point got to put their own interpretation of their financial risk. And it's going to be interesting to see how they're doing that, because to your point, how much oversight do they have across their portfolio? How much risk oversight do they have across their portfolio for them to basically make that self-determination? Which is why I love what you guys are doing, again, being able to use a platform to kind of get this holistic view of all of their portfolio companies, so that they at least have some sort of visibility around their overall risk profile across their portfolio.
Yeah, and that's our approach is to take a portfolio wide view of security across, not just at the PE level, but their individual portfolio companies. Are they moving towards the same direction? Do they have a security standard that they are mandating their companies do? We're seeing that 2-3 years ago, that was not the case. Now, almost every single company we talk to is either they're thinking about it, or they already have a security standard that they've put in place. A minimum guidelines that say these are the essentials or foundational components that every single company we assess has to either have when they join, or needs to work towards. So we're seeing that PE firms are taking security a lot more seriously and building those standards, because they want to have assurance that they're protected, again, managing that risk.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about getting the discussion of security into the boardroom, right, if your primary investors or funders are basically taking it seriously, then it's going to be a conversation at the board level, which again is still, I know, the holy grail that we keep talking about, having, the kind of that board level focus on security. It still doesn't happen often enough, but maybe this will do it. And so what's next? I mean, whether it's just the implications of the SEC ruling, other trends that are coming out. Obviously, AI is a huge focus for everyone right now, and we did a separate webinar specifically on the subject and the risks of AI. What's next? What if you were to kind of try and prognosticate into the next kind of 2-5 years, how do you see things playing out? Maybe I'll start with James on that one.
These are tough questions. Okay. Well, AI right now, I think, is ultimately it's another data leakage problem, isn't it? Data loss prevention. That's at its core is another way for you to inadvertently or intentionally allow information to leave the organization. So it partly again comes down to the people, to the users, and establishing what's acceptable, what isn't. And we've seen that. I think it's similar to social media and how companies use social media, allowed and permitted use of it. At a fundamental level, not getting into what the technology does or anything else. I think for us as practitioners, there's a lot of benefits. I think it can speed up our work if used judiciously and properly. And we're experimenting with it just in terms of how can we help it with threat intelligence and risk awareness and raising awareness with our clients. How can we leverage AI to do some of the heavy lifting for us? And right now we're in the phase of understanding if we can trust it, because of there are a lot of caveats out there. So I think for us, AI focus on that, is a great enabler if used right and if it works, but we're still in that testing phase. I think likewise for clients, if they're careful how we use it from a security perspective, I think it presents all the same challenges as any new technology. Is how does it open the door to attack? How does it open the door to losses? And what do we need to look at from a risk perspective so that we can advise our clients and the businesses on how to use it properly and how to protect themselves when they're using it? Because again, we always have had to avoid and should avoid in securities. We're not here to say no. We're here to help you achieve business objectives within your risk tolerance. So how do we do that with AI or anything else that comes along?
Yeah, I love the concept of viewing AI as a data leakage issue, because I think it's also a really interesting supply chain management issue, because what we see regularly is every vendor you use, whether it's your CRM vendor, whether it's Zoom, right? I'm not picking on Zoom, but we're using the medium. They just suddenly announce that they're switching on an AI feature, and you don't really get any choice, right? And so it's really unclear for a security professional to really understand what risk is that introducing, right? You've already kind of pre-approved a platform. You've already presumably done your kind of security audit and you have your criteria. Are organizations spending enough time looking at when their provider or their supplier switches on an AI component, having to redo that risk assessment again to understand the implications that potentially has? Because as we know that AI is all about training models, and training models require a lot of data. That data isn't going to be hosted within your environment; it's going to be hosted in another environment. So, how much of your data is it taking into those environments, which is always a challenge. Aaron, what about you? What do you see as what's keeping you awake at night, or what do you think are the big challenges in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just there's the velocity of change. The introduction for AI. That's definitely a major change that's being introduced, but. It's going to be used for, kind of, we'll call it good and evil, right? There's going to be some things that it's going to be used for, by the bad guys as well. But, I think organizations need to, take security seriously and, stay up to date. Kind of gone are the days that you can just put up a antivirus and think you're good, or a firewall. I mean, you have to be, kind of, a lot more vigilant about, where your data is, who has access to it, how are people using your systems, especially now with people working from home. We're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. Work from home is here to stay. I mean, I think I read something the other day that was 40% of all business work could be done remotely. So people are pushing back about going back, back to the office. Or they're willing to do it on a fractional basis, but they don't want to be tied down to the office anymore. So I think understanding, securing the world is really what we have to be thinking about, is, security wherever you are, everywhere and anywhere. That's going to be something that I think organizations need to continue to think about and plan for, how to make sure that we're securely doing business, whether it's from an office or from the beach in Hawaii. We have to have security everywhere. So I think that's organizations need to kind of grapple with that and take that on and have a strategy about how they're going to make sure that happens.
Yeah, I saw an interesting meme the other day, and it was like, we're going to need AI to solve the challenges of AI, right? Sort of like as the kind of goes on, because a lot of these problems, to your point, have been around for a while. But what has changed is the kind of demographics of everything, right? Where everyone is, as you point, everyone's everywhere, right? And so, which is wonderful for most of us, right? Who have the ability to, the call I was on previous to this, one of the individuals was in New Zealand, right? And they're just jumping on the call and then doing this video. So it's amazing that we have this incredibly flexible work environment, but it does make this job a lot more challenging in terms of, some of the original ways of doing it no longer apply. Look, Aaron, James, I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. If you one final thing, obviously to kind of say, or a parting piece of advice, or even, one kind of call out to a kind of PE company that's out there listening about, why BIP is the right organization for them, what would it be?
I would say, you know, we only support private equity, so we understand the concerns that private equity people have. So you know, we focus on making sure that we're identifying and managing risk, and that's part of the reason why we you know got onto the Ostendio platform, is to help organizations manage risk better. You know, we focus exclusively on private equity firms, and you know, understand how they look at risk, understand how they want to manage risk, and you know the ownership life cycle is somewhat unique, and that's why we focus on that industry vertical. Our focus is to be the go-to organization for private equity firms, you know, because we can not only understand you know where they're coming from, but we can help address the needs of address their needs as well as their portfolio company needs.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you both, and I really appreciate the due diligence you did on our organization. So thank you for that. Miranda, do we have any questions from attendees?
Hello, yes, we do. I like the idea, Aaron, of working from Hawaii. That appeals to me with remote work. Ostendio is a remote-only company, so we appreciate the work from home options. I do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one may have been covered slightly by what you were saying earlier, Aaron, but I guess I'll send it to you. The risk management steps that companies need to take to get funded by a PE firm, is there a starting point you would suggest, the first steps that they should take?
Yeah, I think you know it's probably a really closely aligned with being able to get cybersecurity insurance. You know, cybersecurity insurance now has done a really good job. You know, of course, they're managing risk as well. They're trying to obviously make sure things are in place so that organizations do not have a major cyber incident that causes significant loss that they have to pay out. So, you know, if an organization wants to be, you know, private equity backed or wants to have a private equity investment, if you had cyber insurance in place, you've kind of checked a lot of the boxes, including things like MFA and other policies and procedures and processes that organizations, you know, make sure the organization is a lot more resilient. So, I mean, there's no magic answer to that, but certainly if you had that in place, it would make you a lot more attractive from a security perspective. You know, of course, the business has to be attractive as well, but from a security perspective, if you can get cyber insurance, you're probably a lot further along.
And Grant, there was one question that came in from you. I think they've been having a little bit of a chat on the LinkedIn feed, but how do you define a well-run company when it comes to security and compliance and security and risk management?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that James and Aaron probably answer to that. But you know, at the end of the day, it's about managing risk, and you know, if you have an accurate assessment of what your risk is, and you're at least managing and putting mitigations in place. You know, I like to say that if a board understands the risk of an organization to the point that they can accept operational risk, then they're probably to some degree well run. The challenge for me is always a lack of understanding and a lack of knowing what the risk is. Every business has to move forward with some degree of risk, whether it be economic or security. But it's about understanding that risk and being able to make appropriate decisions and investment decisions on getting that risk to what they would consider as being an acceptable level. And I think people misunderstand that. I think they think there's a kind of particular line that they have to go over. But that line is going to vary based on different organizations and different organizations' risk goals. So from my perspective, it's really about, you know, an organization that understands its risk and has effective risk and mitigation processes in place is going to be a well-run organization. And they're only going to do that if they have a basic security framework operational. I don't know if Aaron or James want to answer that.
Yeah, the one thing that I think is really important for people to think about when it comes to security is it's not a one and done thing. So you can't just pass an assessment today and, or secure your site today and expect that it's going to maintain its level of security. Things are constantly evolving. I mean, we didn't expect COVID to happen and people go work from home. That was, if you had done an assessment in 2019, and said, okay, everyone, with the notion of everyone's at the office, that landscape has completely shifted. It's no longer there. So having a kind of a constant or regular review of your security posture is really critical. And as part of that, also taking a look at your cloud providers. If you've got Microsoft 365 or you're on Azure, AWS, or whatever, taking a look at the configuration, doing a cloud hygiene assessment. Do you have your cloud environment properly set up? We find that often there's a lot of gaps there where people have shared documents, publicly shared document links. That's significant gap that might be out there. But again, regular vigilance, regular checks, assessments on your different core systems. Are they properly configured? Maybe new security regulations have come out, or new security recommendations, best practices have come out. Is your current setup aligned with that, or are there gaps? We've had a couple of instances working with some of our customers where they had good tools in place, but the tools that were in place were installed 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, and things have changed, and those tools were not as effective, and in fact did not stop what they were supposed to stop. So even if we check the box, say yes, we've got that email security or endpoint protection, if it's not properly configured, you don't really have it.
Yeah, and is there anything you'd like to add, James, at all to that? I think Aaron did a great job covering it, but
He did. I guess to say as well, and both Grant's earlier point and Aaron's, is that we work with a massively diverse customer base. Now that's one of the things that attracted me to come and join PIP was, we work in a lot of sectors. We work with companies of all different sizes, be it users or market cap, revenues, whatever. So what's important is that while the principles and the fundamentals that we observe in risk management are the same, the application of those has to vary. And I think that's part of where our expertise comes in. We have to recognize that is that, doing risk management for a 25-person company is not the same as doing it for a 2,000-person company, and there are other factors involved. We have to right size the approach. And I think I alluded to earlier, that's where Ostendio is helping us is we can have a light touch, we can have a medium touch, if we will, or we can have the full risk management platform and everything in between. And I think it's important for us in the space we're in that we deliver risk management that way.
And I think you're talking about different industries and different levels of security maturity. One of the questions that has just come in is from someone on LinkedIn who's asking if a company is security immature, is there a single most important step a company should take? And I know we've talked about risk assessments. Where would you suggest that security?
Call us and we'll put them right.
I'm calling us Ostendio.
There you go. That's where we look at those foundation elements, or the cyber essentials, or call it what you will. But I think it's tactically solved for those, because without those fundamentals in place, it doesn't matter how much other management and risk management and everything else you wrap around that. If you don't get the fundamentals right, and you don't have the technical security in place, and start to take some comfort from those actions, and knowing that you're now you're reducing the likelihood of a breach from where it was, or some sort of cyber event, then you're not winning if you're not doing those things. So I think it's for us is and we've been doing this long enough as well, and lots of people that are watching this, I'm sure, they could write down on a piece of paper the things they expect to find at any company, having had no experience with them, and walk in and hand that to the leadership there and say, this is what's wrong, this is what's missing. And you know that that list will represent, and there'll be most things on it. So that's what I think is important, is just deal with the fundamentals, don't ignore them, and don't assume just because you've been doing it for a while that you've solved for all of those. It goes to Aaron's point earlier. You might have the tooling, but you may not have configured it properly, and you won't find that out until the breach happens. So,
yeah. I think the Australian government have their kind of cyber essentials list has, I think, 20 points on it. And there was a study done that if you just implement those 20 points, you've probably got about 90% of what you need to do to build an information security program in place. Now, what that misses is the execution of those points, right? How well do you implement those points? It misses the fact that I think the point Aaron put forward is you have to be doing that continually. And so, this is not a one and done, it's like a continued monitoring. And then it also misses the fact that remaining 10% is huge, right? I mean, there's just, as I think both Aaron and James said, they'll come in and they'll look at your organization and, putting in the basics is, it's like, wanting to run a marathon and at least being able to get up and run, right? I mean, that's great, you can run, but if you're really going to kind of run that marathon, you have to learn how to run, you have to train, you have to kind of do the day-to-day grind, right? And so, I sometimes have a challenge with kind of the basics question, because, when you're asking what are the basics you need to do, it's almost like saying, I just need to go and run. But, it's a journey, and it's great that people want to start the journey. But, there's a process and a path that they have to follow.
Yeah. And I've got one final question about the ways that PIP collaborates with its clients to develop customized security strategies, I guess specific to their risk profile or their business profile. Shall I? Thank you.
Yeah. I can start with that, and James obviously can jump in. I think how we approach helping organizations really is starting off with that assessment, doing the assessment, figuring out where they currently are on the maturity spectrum. Are they down at that lower essentials or foundations level, or are they much further along towards managed or kind of that growth and scale? So what we like to do is start with the assessment, figure out where the company is at, and then build an action plan. Building that action plan is really going to help, build a roadmap of improvement. And then, and often we come on board as a longer term, ongoing VCSO, where we provide continuous support or ongoing support to make sure that progression up the maturity line is continuing, and also establish those regular reviews of systems that like we mentioned before. Are you maybe annually taking a look at your security configurations on your email gateways and on your cloud things like AWS or Azure, all of those types of things, and really build a program, because the security needs to be a program. It's not a point in time activity. And while we are not an MSP or MSSP, but what we do instead, how we partner with a lot of those organizations to take the point systems and build a whole holistic approach. The holistic approach really needs to be, here's how we're going to attack security and build those layers of defense that work together, as opposed to a point system. Those things, they are not usually at odds, but they don't always complement them. They don't always complement well. So we like to build a holistic approach that is they all work together to build a lot more resilient organization.
And knowing that our cybersecurity program is never done, right?
Right. That's right.
Always ongoing. Well, we are running out of time now, gentlemen. So I'm afraid we're going to have to bring our webinar to an end today. But I would like to thank you for joining and thank everyone else for joining today, both on Zoom and on LinkedIn. We are just going to, I'm just popping up our consultation Calendly link again in case anyone needs to be able to reach us. You can also find us at ostendio.com and also on LinkedIn or Ostendio. And I would like to thank Aaron and James for joining us today. And please be on the lookout for our next webinar. Thanks everybody and have a great day.